Hello, welcome to Dating Advice with Mr. Dyer. First things first, my wife has told me that you should never date someone wearing a sweater vest. You can take or leave that advice because I'm a little preferential to it. Another thing is you need to worry about age. Just like taking anything home to mom and dad, you want to make sure that it's age appropriate. And it's not too old or not too young. So bear that in mind. And as another rule or guidance is to remember that when dating artifacts, the most important thing to do is try to find primary sources. And one of those primary sources that are fairly readily available are catalogs, especially of your more famous brands. Another way to date artifacts is many of these things, they have addresses on them. So do a quick Google search, dive in. Just like regular dating, diving in is going to be necessary. You just got to put yourself out there. The general guidelines I give you are just that. They're general. So to get a specific date on your item, you're going to need to do some digging. You're going to need to do some research. So if you do a Google search of a manufacturer and you find out that they moved from one place to another and you can pinpoint a range, then that is one good way of doing it. Another good way of doing it is trying to compare original artifacts that have provenance. So if you can find something, an item with provenance, and you can compare your item to that item and it looks like a match, then you're probably pretty safe. But otherwise, the guidelines I give you are just going to be general guidelines. So make sure not to take everything that I have to say as a hard, fast rule, because when it comes to straight razors and the time periods that they were used, there really is no hard and fast rule. There are trends. Just like today, certain things are popular. Tomorrow, it might not be so popular. All right, so let's get into it. As always, I like to thank my wife and family for their unconditional support. And I like to thank my students. And I'd really like to thank you, my viewer, my subscribers today, because thanks to you, I made my goal. We're now over 100 subscribers. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And if you're new to my channel, please check out my other videos to see if they might be of interest to you. And if you please like them, please subscribe, and please share. I also like to take the moment and thank my patrons on Patreon, because without you, we wouldn't be going in some extended directions. And there's extra videos, extra tidbits on there to award you. Please check them out. And there's going to be one that's a little bit more in depth about straight razors too. So thank you very much. So my most popular video that I have made to date was about straight razors, straight razor shaving, and it had over 200 views. So that kind of tells me that there's some interest out there. So I thought, and I make one about specifically straight razors of the 19th century and help you if that's something that you want to pursue. And maybe it'll just expand your knowledge of what might be considered a droll thing to do in today's society, but back then was considered kind of a ritualistic type activity. It took a little bit more time, took some more preparation, and it was a little bit more personal, okay? So straight razors, just like safety razors and just like our common disposable razors of today, they have transitional periods, right? We can date artifacts based off of how they were used and materials that they used to make them. Were they disposable? Was it something that was going to be kept around for a long time? What was the intended purpose, right? So I'm going to take you through various straight razors in my own personal collection that shows you examples from the early 1800s through the late 1800s to help you identify, if you go to an antique mall or on eBay or you're buying one. Because as living historians, we want to make sure that we have items that are correct and representational to the people that we represent. So if you are a Civil War soldier, you probably don't want to have a later 19th century straight razor in your kit, right? That way when someone takes a look, and maybe someone who's a little bit more knowledgeable than you, they're not going to call you out on it, but also because you're educating the public and you want to present to them the best that you can, okay? Now, here's a little forewarning. Straight razor collecting can be kind of addictive. When I first got into it, I thought I needed like 4 or 5, just to round out my collection. But then I was like, I needed 7. I needed 1 per day, right? So I got 7, and now I have over 20 straight razors. So, forewarned, if you get into this, you might be hooked. I'm going to start off with the early 1800s, and I have a straight razor that I'm in the process of refurbishing, and it's going to be a stubtail razor. In the early 1800s, your straight razors are going to have a shorter, stubbier tail. They're going to tend to be a little bit fatter. And you can identify an early 1800 straight razor versus a 1700 straight razor because the shank doesn't suddenly drop off like this one does. 1700 straight razors tend to gradually go into the shank. As you can see, this one falls off, right? You can also age a straight razor by its grind. This is not a solid way, but at least gets you a starting point. Because if it is a wedge straight razor, chances are it might be earlier than the 1900s because people's styles tended to change. What they liked tended to change. So this one is a wedge. Now, a nice thing about wedges is they're heftier. So if you have a fuller beard or curlier beard, wedges will mow through it. The problem with wedges is they're a little bit more difficult to keep honed because there's a lot more steel that has to wear away on the blade to get that nice crisp point. I have another example of a stubtail here. Now this is definitely not going to be the 1830s like this one. The stubtail is not as wide as you can see. But it's probably like 1850s or before. And this is a frame back. As you can see in the outline, the blade itself was put into a steel frame, and it's frame back, and it's narrow. Now they didn't have the technology to grind away steel to make what's called a full hollow or hollow grind. So instead, they transitioned to frame backs to do away with that. This is going to be less steel to hone to get that fine point to make for a comfortable shave. Made out of ivory scales. That's going to be a little bit more for a person of means. If you're a private, unless you come from a wealthy family, you're probably not going to have ivory. Instead, you're probably going to have horn. Now this, we're going to transition into more of the 1850s to the 1870s. And one way you can identify an age of straight razor is by the moniker on the tang. For example, this one is Joseph Rogers, and it says Sheffield on the bottom. If we go back to our Greaves straight razor, this one just says Greaves and Sons. Now, we also know from the company on researching it that Greaves and Sons transitioned to the sheaf works in the 1830s. So this was before the 1830s. Now, could this have been sold and used after the 1830s? Certainly. If you have stock, you're not just going to throw it away. You're going to sell it until it's sold. The same thing for this one. This one does not have Sheffield on it. So this is probably earlier than the 1850s. And if you look at straight razors from the 1700s, oftentimes they didn't even have the manufacturer on them, let alone the city like Sheffield. So this is made out of horn. This is called honey horn, and it's clear. So this is for definitely a person that's more of a common. Joseph Rogers was really popular in the 1800s, so I can suggest them as a good razor. In fact, all the ones that I list off on, I'm telling you are good, because if it's a crappy razor, I don't keep them. This one here is what's called a boutique razor. This came in a box that I purchased on eBay, and it has the company where it was sold, which this one was HCH 173 Broadway, New York. So some type of boutique. This Rogers & Sons, and it has Sheffield. And this one has the address. You can also date straight razors. If they have the address, you can identify if the company moved from one place to another place. So those are the early 1800s with the stub tails. Then we talk about the 1850s to the 1830s, a little bit before. Again, they can transition into the 1860s. I'm going to jump ahead though before I dive into the 1860s, and I'm going to show you some ones that are later 1800s to help you identify. So in the later 1800s, the tails get longer and they get narrower. It's like this example here. Also in the later 1800s, the etching on blades is going to become pretty popular as an extra accommodation. Think of it like air conditioning or power windows back in the 90s, right? So there's some etching on this, and it's also stamped with gold leaf. This is Joseph Allen & Sons. And in the 1890s, it became required that you had to put the country of origin. So this one has not just Sheffield, but also has England on it. This here is called the shoulder. So if you're honing your straight razor, you can lay that flat on the stone and it'll help you keep it honed the correct depth. The next ones I'm going to show you is going to be the 1850s to the 1870s. This is Wade & Butcher. The next three actually I'm going to show you are Wade & Butcher. Wade & Butcher is considered like the Gillette of their time. It's a house name brand. Everybody knew Wade & Butcher. So if you're going to get into it, you can't go wrong with a Wade & Butcher straight razor. And there's still plenty of them out there. A lot of them might need to be refurbished, but you can find one. They're pretty affordable. This is horn, scale, and it's this fake tortoise shell, or FAUX, F-A-U-X, tortoise shell. And it has the silver echelon. So this is probably going to be your middle income. It's not going to be just a plain Jane horn straight razor. If you want to step it up a notch, you can get this model here. And this model also has etching, as you can see. But the tail is a little bit fatter, and it's not as long. It's not as narrow as the other later 1800s straight razors. When I take a straight razor out in the field, it tends to be this one. This is my workhorse. I love this guy here. So there you can see his tail. It's just a plain black horn, scaled. I rescaled this myself. Straight razor. It has a barber's notch. It's 3/4 inch wide. Commonly, you tend to see a little bit narrower. But if you, again, have a heavier beard, then go with a little bit more heft. And this is a wedge. And it's stamped Wade & Butcher Sheffield. And this one even has the arrow, the cross, and the B. And this one here is another Wade & Butcher. And oftentimes, straight razors were rescaled in wood because it's something that everybody had. It's common for you to be able to at least whittle something away. So this is a wooden scaled Wade & Butcher for barber's use, which is highly collectible, straight razor. But the reason why I wanted to show you this one is because of the grind. This is called a rattler grind here. So they didn't have the technology to completely grind away to make the hollow like this one. This is my example, Joseph Allen & Sons. after the 1890s. So instead, they would take a wedge and they would just grind out on flats this. So you still get a hollow type grind to it. You have less steel to wear away, but it's also not a frame back. It's using one piece of steel. Now, if you get into straight razor collecting and shaving, the wider the blade, the more expensive it's going to be. There's a lot of people that collect wide bladed straight razors. This one does have some nice heft. It does shave immaculately well. It goes through hair like butter. So it is one of my favorites. But if that's something that you want to get, you're going to pay a little bit more for it. Okay, the last two straight razors I'm going to show you are kind of transitional. They're unique. They have some special properties. They're boutique razors out there, just like this one that I showed you. It has kind of unique special spines. You can see some spine work done using files, which were pretty popular among people. But this one here, it's a very flat ivory scaled straight razor. I love this one. This one is actually one of my absolute favorites. As you can see, it kind of swoops down. It has a smile. This one is made by Wigfall, and it does not have Sheffield, and it doesn't have England on it. But look at that tail. That tail is super tiny. So this one's kind of hard to date on some of the characteristics I told you. Now we know it's before the 1890s because it doesn't have England, and it may have been or was likely produced before the 1850s because it doesn't have Sheffield. But the company is a Sheffield company. Another unique straight razor I have for you is this little guy. I have yet to see another one like it. This has a French point. As you can see, it's kind of fluted on the spine, on the tip, and it's only about 2 inches long. Look at that. So it's really tiny, and it's narrow. It shaves wonderfully. This one is made by Bangle, T.R. Cadman maker in Sheffield. And you may not be able to see it, but it has jimps, which is another term I'll tell you about on straight razors when you're looking for it. If you're going to be a medical reenactor, oftentimes the lists on the hospital steward's, no, not steward's manual, the surgeon's manual in the complement tells you that it should have a straight razor in your pocket kit. If you look and you can find original pocket kits with straight razors, they tend to be smaller, but not this small. And sometimes people confuse straight razors with corn razors. This is not a corn razor. This is a straight razor. Corn razors were used to, remove corns from your feet, bunions, etc. There you go. This is a unique piece. And you can see the tail. It's narrow and it's small. But since it doesn't have England on it, we know it's made before the 1890s. So there you go. Some unique things for you to think about if you're going to get into straight razor shaving, especially for living history. If you are a Spanish-American War or Indian War reenactor, especially Spanish-American War, you definitely want to get one that says before the 1890s. You don't want England on it. But you may want one that has a longer and narrower tail, right? If you're a Civil War reenactor, you're going to be reenacting the mid-1800s, you can't go wrong with something like this, where it's not as narrow and it's not as long. Again, you don't want it to say England on it or the country of manufacture. And if you're going for early 1800s, if you're thinking about doing Mexican-American War before, then you probably want to get something with a stub tail on it to be safe. Or one of the transitional straight razors, like so. And if you're a 1700s reenactor, get a razor that looks nothing like the ones that I've shown you, because I honestly don't have a 1700 straight razor in my collection yet. But look for ones that don't drop off like so. They kind of blend into the shank. Okay. Some manufacturers that I would suggest for you. Joseph Rogers are one of my favorites. Wade & Butcher, you can't go wrong with Wade & Butcher. It's the first straight razor I ever got was Wade & Butcher. It keeps sharp really well, gets an excellent shave. If you have a curlier beard, don't go with the narrower straight razors. Try to stay away from rattler grinds. At least that's my personal suggestion. Go with a wedge because that heft will help you move through it and you're not going to feel it as it's cutting. If you tend to have a straighter growing beard, then a rattler grind would be perfect for you. You can't go wrong with a wedge either way, but it's just going to be a little bit more difficult to hone. Joseph Allen and Sons, Wolstenholme are good ones. Greaves is really good. They're kind of hard to come by because people collect them really well. They're not as common as Wade & Butcher. If you get a Bengal straight razor, those things are gold. They're also kind of hard to come by, but they're excellent straight razors. And the pipe razor, check them out. But if you get a Sheffield straight razor, you're not really going to go wrong. And this is the reason why I collect Sheffields. I only have one German straight razor, and I can date it to the 1930s. And it's a Witt. The reason why I prefer Sheffield straight razors versus American or German for 19th century reenacting is because Sheffield kind of was king of steel in the 1800s. It wasn't until the mid to late 1800s where Solingen, Germany, started to get their technology together to make really good straight razors. And it's not even until the late 1800s, early 1900s when American steel is going to be up to snuff or up to par of Sheffield or English steel. But it's completely personal choice. It's whatever you like, whatever you want. But Sheffield steel is a great, safe bet for American Civil War reenacting. And that's what I would suggest you go with. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Please ask away if you have one. Please share my video. Please like if you haven't already. And if this is new, please subscribe. Please subscribe to my channel. Check out my other videos. I'll post some links in my description below of some resources for you to help you identify your straight razor. I would strongly suggest you check out a Straight Razor Place, which is where I started. Badger and Blade is another really good forum site. There's a Straight Razor Place Facebook group and Buy Sell Trade on Facebook. And those guys, you can't go wrong. They won't steer you wrong. It's a great community of enthusiasts. They'll teach you how to shave, what problems you might have if you're shaving, what equipment you might need, even how to restore a straight razor. So check them out. Thank you so much. I really appreciate getting over 100 subscribers. Please share, help our educational journey expand to others. Have a wonderful day. Give a kiss and hug to your loved ones, and take care.